Republican strategist, ad maker Fred Davis recently boarded the Trump train after working for the super PAC that was trying to get John Kasich the Republican nomination. So, Fred, let's talk about Trump's brand. If you were so on the train that you were making his ads and worried about his brand, what would your posture be? How would you conceive of that project?
Well, if you remember, Mark, about a year ago, a representative of the Trump campaign did call us. So I actually got to go through that exercise once upon a time, and I think I was exactly right at the time, but I was a year ahead of time. I said he had to not be Donald Trump. He couldn't be the apprentice guy. He couldn't brag. He couldn't use his helicopters and his airplanes, and that was probably the worst advice I've ever given anyone. I think the helicopter and the airplanes became icons in the primary race and did a great service for Donald. But I think right now he needs to get to what I was recommending a year ago, which is he can go on and use the plane and the helicopters and do his rallies that he does so well. He can still be a little bit outrageous in those. And that has attracted a certain type of voter to the Donald Trump group. And obviously it's a winning coalition. But he needs to get me. He needs to get more establishment types back on board. And to do that, number one, I think he needs to be presidential. And you hear that a lot. I'm not the only one that says it. But not maybe in his rallies, but I think Paul Manafort's doing a pretty good job, and Rick Wiley, those guys are doing a good job getting him more presidential in that direction. But then real quickly, he has to shift it to being more about me and more about you and more about every American voter than it is about Donald Trump. I'm kind of tiring of hearing how successful he is. But if he continues in his rally to say how successful he is, but his paid advertising makes him look presidential, and he talks about what his brain is going to do for me. Is it going to help me pay my mortgage? Is it going to help me make my car payment? So more about me, less about Trump. And then finally, because people do vote for people they like, and both Hillary and Donald have a little upside down problem in their likability, he needs to be humanized a little bit. I've never met him, but I've talked to some people who've had dinner with him, and just his dinner conversation and some of those things, he's pretty normal. The eating at McDonald's, all that kind of stuff. But you wouldn't expect that unless you heard it from somebody who actually went and dined with him. So that, I think there's a twofold approach. Keep doing what you're doing because it's working in the rallies to a certain type of voter. But then let the rest of us see that you have a serious presidential side that will help make my life better.
So, Fred, I want you to pretend right now that you just drank an entire bottle of Michter's sour mash or bourbon, whichever one you prefer. And now you're looking at me, and I actually have morphed into Donald Trump. And you've walked into my office, and I've invited you in, and I've said, Fred, those are some really interesting general ideas. I'm thinking about hiring you to be my ad guy. Fred, make the pitch for me, how you'd execute that. Tell me, just give me your pitch to Mr. Trump about what you would specifically do. What kind of ads would you put on the air? What duration, when, et cetera?
Well, I would start with, as I said a year ago, I would start with a race-defining film. It's not that hard to define Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as two different people. The closest I could come, and out here in Hollywood this is used a lot, is defining it based on something else. Mine would be Morning in America for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan wasn't in those ads, but people were. People that were just getting married, people that got their first home, people that got their second car, people that were able to put their kids through college because Ronald Reagan had been president. And I think that was past tense, but this could be future tense. There's a lot of tension in this country. I don't think Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee if people were happy with Washington. Well, they're not, and they're worried, and they're concerned, way more so than in any of our lifetimes, I think, as proven by Donald's ascension. So he just needs to show how his successes help me. And from everything I know about Donald Trump, that's a pitch that he probably would appreciate.
So you'd go with a long film released pretty soon and then get up on the air with a bunch of 60s, a bunch of 30s. What would it look like?
Well, I'd start with the long film. Then I would make a 60 out of that and run it heavily on broadcast and cable. And then for the remainder of the campaign, you have to contrast, I suppose, with Hillary somewhat. But I don't think in Donald's unusual case, he has to do it as much as others do. I think the most important thing he can do is say, I'm going to make your life better. And it doesn't have to be what's wrong with Hillary. The press does a pretty good job of talking about that. I think he needs to come off as presidential, and maybe he's not even in his ads. Maybe it's just people talking about their hopes and dreams and how a Donald Trump can help fulfill them. I think people thought that about Barack Obama in 2008, and then 4 years later, they were disappointed that their mortgage wasn't paid, that they didn't have a new car, and some of those things, which was a problem for Obama. I think Donald Trump, it's possible he could actually make people's lives better, and he could sure sell the story based on his own life.
Less than a minute. Tell me a thing or two you think the Clinton campaign's doing well now.
And we have a whole minute for me to fill.
Less than
30 seconds.
Now, my point being, I don't think they're doing much very well.
I got the joke.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you see anything they're doing well?
I really don't so far. I certainly anticipate them doing something. I mean, do you? What do you think they're doing well?
Raising money.
Well, they're raising money, but Donald Trump started
I'll tell you
that
this.
today. He's out here.
I'll tell you this, and we got to go. They're not leaking. You know, you see stories constantly now about Manafort versus Lewandowski and tension within the Trump campaign. Clinton campaign, you don't hear much about debates about strategy and tactics and all that, even as they're under a fair amount of pressure. So
She's also not going out of her way to offend any large segments of the American electorate.
Fred, thank you.
Who could you be talking about?
I don't know.
Thank you, Fred.